Do you want to make money flipping gaming PCs for profit? Maybe you don't know where to start as far as what parts to choose, or maybe you're already flipping PCs and you're only making just a little bit of money. That's why I'm here to help you in this video. There are 8 parts to build a gaming PC. We're going to go over each category and let you know my favorite parts that I use for flipping to maximize your profit, as well as tell you some things to avoid along the way. All the good products we talk about in this video will be linked down in the description, and they will be affiliate links so that you can check them out. We're going to start with talking about CPUs because that's typically the first place that I start when looking for PC parts. There are 2 major players here, Intel and AMD. And of course, we know that Intel is pretty popular. A lot of people like Intel, but Intel is very expensive. A lot of people talk about how they want i7 or i9 Intel processors, and they are really good for gaming, unless, you know, you get the 14th gen that's having problems because, yeah, that's a long story. You can look it up if you want. But i9s and i7s are not really the best thing when it comes to flipping PCs. I did not mean to drop both of those. Anyway, you don't want to buy an i9 or an i7. Even older generation Intel processors are very expensive. For instance, you can get something like a 10th gen i7 or an 11th gen i7 for a whopping $160 on eBay. That's the average price according to averagefinder.com. You can get the i5-12600KF processor for that same price, if not just a little bit cheaper, and you're going to get the same or better performance in most cases and have a little bit better upgrade path. Now, the only time I recommend getting an i5-12600KF processor is if you do get hit up by somebody that wants you to build them a brand new gaming PC and they're wanting to somewhat stay on a budget. The i5-12600KF is really good paired with a DDR4 motherboard, which we'll talk about later on, and that can save you some money and give you the option to give them a pretty nice PC with a really good CPU. But when it comes to the king of PC flips, it's got to be AM4. AM4 has the best socket on the market right now for PC flipping. And if you watched any of the Computex coverage, they're still coming out with AM4 CPUs, which is just absolutely crazy to me. But AM4 gives us a great option because they have awesome motherboards, awesome RAM options, which we'll talk about all later in the video. But the 2 main CPUs for AMD that I absolutely love are the Ryzen 5 3600 and the Ryzen 5 5600. Now, where can you get these CPUs, you might ask? Well, I like to get them from AliExpress, and I know that's kind of, you know, somewhere that a lot of people don't like to ship, and it does take a while to get here, although, you know, about 2 weeks is the average getting here time for me in most cases. But you can get the Ryzen 5 3600 for around $60, and sometimes it's been on sale recently for as little as like $55 or $58. And you can get the Ryzen 5 5600 right at around like $100, and it's been on sale as low as like $90 to $88 a lot here recently. And I've had absolutely 0 issues from AliExpress, but it's just totally up to you. You can definitely go to eBay or your local Facebook marketplace, and you might can find a deal on those CPUs there. And that's not to say that, you know, you can't find a really great deal on Intel processors too. You just have to be patient and look at the average viewfinder.com price. That's kind of the place that I go to, and just make sure you don't overpay. If you can get a good chunk under that price limit for Intel, then I might go with it, but in most cases you're going to be better off with AM4. The only problem is a lot of times these AM4 CPUs will not come with the coolers, and you gotta have a CPU cooler. So let's talk about that. Now, when it comes to CPU coolers, you really have 3 main options, and yes, I know I have 4 coolers here, but I'll get to that in a second. The first option is why I have 2 coolers here, is you have the stock cooler. So Intel stock cooler, which on the 12th and 13th gen and 14th gen look a little bit better, but there's not many Intel CPU that can handle a stock cooler. Another reason not to choose Intel for PC flipping. And then you have the Ryzen stock cooler, which is pretty awesome, and you can actually take the outer shell off and paint it and add some value to it as well. So you can get these stock coolers sometimes in eBay deals with the CPU itself, or in the Facebook marketplace deals, wherever you're looking for your deals, but sometimes they don't come with the stock cooler. You can get a stock cooler on Amazon that's like $7 or $8, and a lot of times that'll be just fine. Again, you can paint the outer shell and add some color to it. If I can find the old videos where I've done that, I'll, you know, show you what I'm talking about. But for only about $9 to $10 more, you can get one of these coolers right here, which is the ID Cooling 214 XT. I think it has SE in the name too, but it's the 214 XT from ID Cooling. There's a black version and a white version, so whichever aesthetic you're going for, RGB sells PC. So if you can get a cheap RGB CPU cooler, it's totally worth it. It's like, these are like $17, $18 on Amazon. They've been that way forever. It adds flair to the build, and it helps them sell a whole lot more when you have RGB versus not having RGB. So these are my go-to. Now, the other option is an AIO. Now, these are liquid coolers, so there's a few bad things wrong with that that, one, they are a little bit more expensive, which there are a couple that, you know, I think are pretty awesome, and I'll tell you about those in a minute. But the problem with these is they don't last as long typically as air coolers. They'll last probably long enough before whoever buys your PC will upgrade, but the life expectancy of an AIO is shorter of that of an air cooler. But if you really had a little bit higher end build, or maybe you just wanted to put the aesthetics up a little bit of a notch because you were charging more for this PC, Thermalright has some AIOs, a 240mm and a 360mm AIO that look really awesome, and they're less than 70 bucks. I think like the 240mm is less than 50 and the 360mm is just under 70. So those are cheap options if you want to do that, but again, I would absolutely not do that unless you're building a higher end PC for somebody that needs that type of cooler. Other than that, stick with the tried and true. It's never let me down. It comes with everything you need for either CPU, so you're good to go on that. If you can't find the ID cooling cooler, or you don't like the way it looks, you could also check out the Thermalright Assassin cooler. I think it's like the X120 or something 120, something like that. There's an all white and all black version, so if you're going for more of a stealthy look with no RGB, those coolers are easier to find, but they do have RGB versions as well. They're just $1 or $2 more than the ID cooling, so you can't really go wrong either way. But in order for all of this to work, we need a motherboard. So let's talk about motherboards. So you can definitely waste a lot of money on motherboards if you're not careful. Now, assuming you've built a PC before, you know which motherboards go with which CPUs. You have to put an Intel motherboard with an Intel CPU, and it's got to be in the correct generation or socket set, however you want to look at it. So I'm assuming you know all of that. So what we need to make sure that we understand are the best motherboards for PC flipping are not things like this. This is the motherboard I put in my brother's PC about a year ago. It looks awesome and it's really fancy, and you can do a lot of stuff with it, but it's not, I mean, you're not going to make money using motherboards like this, because the PC places that can use motherboards like this, they're getting them cheaper than what we are getting them. So you're not making money off motherboards like this. The same thing goes for like the Z670 motherboards, like for the AM5 socket, or X570, X470 from AMD. You're not going to make a lot of money off those motherboards unless you just get a really, really good deal. Again, averagefinder.com, that's a great place to go. But not just looking at average prices, you also have to make sure that you pay attention to, like, can I get something like a B450 cheaper? That's what you really need to look at, because if I get an X470 or an X570 motherboard and I paid $110 for that, like it's gonna do, basically, as far as gaming is concerned, it's gonna do mostly the same thing that a B450 would. The big thing that you can kind of look at for AM4 is that a B450, a B350, anything that's 300 or 400, it is not gonna have Gen 4 support, which means your M.2 SSDs that we'll talk about here in a little bit are not going to run quite as fast, and you're not going to get the full amount of speeds that you paid for. Depending on what graphics card you use, it's not going to make a huge difference in gaming performance. So if you can find a B550 for around the same price as a B450, I would definitely just go with the B550 because it's a better upgrade. Two more things about motherboards that we need to talk about. The number one thing is Wi-Fi. Most people these days still game on Wi-Fi. I mean, at least in my area they do, maybe not where you're at, but a lot of people need access to Wi-Fi. So some motherboards don't come with Wi-Fi. So if you're gonna buy a used motherboard on eBay or your local Facebook Marketplace, it may not come with Wi-Fi capabilities, so you have to keep that in mind. There are some adapters that I use, whether it's an M.2 Wi-Fi adapter or a PCIe Wi-Fi adapter. I will link those down in the description. I don't use the little USB dongles. I don't think they're super reliable, or at least not any of the ones that I've tried. So I try to use the ones that actually have the antenna so they look a little better. So that's just something you need to keep in mind. I always ask the person if they need Wi-Fi. So if it doesn't have Wi-Fi, I put it in the description, but I always double check with them before I sell it to them. And I can add a Wi-Fi adapter for like 15 to 30 bucks if I need to. I don't really have a specific motherboard that I use all the time, but I will link some of my favorites down in the description down below, as well as some eBay searches that you can just go look at. The second thing is micro ATX versus ATX. Micro ATX is slightly smaller. They can go in cheaper cases most of the time, so keep that in mind, but we're going to talk about cases at the end. So the next few PC parts that we talk about, I typically don't buy used, and that's the SSD, the RAM, and the power supply. I just don't see a whole lot of extra value in buying those used unless you just get a really crazy deal that is way lower than the prices. SSDs, you're losing the lifespan of them, so I don't like to do that. Especially RAM is okay if you can get a decent deal, and power supplies you don't know as well unless you use a power supply tester. So keep that in mind as we go over those parts. Now for SSDs, I always go with an M.2, and it's typically just the cheapest cheapest one I can find. Recently, that's been this Kingston Gen 4 SSD. Now, some Gen 3 SSDs are fine depending on what motherboard you're using. Remember when we talked about the B450 and the B550? So Gen 3 M.2 SSDs are fine in either motherboard. They'll just run at slower speeds. It's totally up to you, just whatever's cheapest. If you have a Gen 4 motherboard, I try to get a Gen 4 SSD because most of the time the price difference is not that much. But the three main brands that I use most of the time are Kingston, Team Group, and Silicon Power. They all have really good budget SSDs. Every now and then you might find a Crucial SSD on sale, but those are typically the brands I look for. King Spec has also become pretty popular here in the US. They're starting to show their face more. Sometimes you can find those on a good deal, and they're pretty reliable as well. As far as size goes, though, for your SSD, 1 terabyte or 500 gigs is kind of where I go for PC flips. If I'm going to charge $600 or more, I'm definitely going 1 terabyte. There's no reason not to. But there are some cases where, like, if the parent only wants to spend like $500 or $550, I will use a 500 gigabyte M.2 SSD to save that extra $30 so that I can use it for some other part that will give them performance in the games that they're wanting. They can always add storage later if they need to, but most of the time the kids are just focused on playing that one game on PC, whether it be Fortnite, Call of Duty, whatever. There is one more thing that goes on the motherboard though, and that is RAM. Now you can waste some money on some RAM if you're not careful, and in fact in one of my recent videos where I built a $1,000 PC, my goofy self wasn't even paying attention at all. I thought I was buying 32 gigs of RAM and I actually bought only 16 and I paid like $65 for it. It was really fancy looking RAM, but it's not worth $65 for 16 gigs. $35 is around the price that you should pay for budget builds. If you want RGB RAM, it's going to be a little harder to find that. Most of the time here recently, because it's so hard to sync up all the lights on the RGB depending on what motherboards you buy, I just buy no RGB RAM. It's cheaper. $35. You can get white sticks, you can get black sticks, you can get silver sticks, whatever matches the theme of your build. $35. I would say that most of the time, like Team Group RAM, Pinnacle's another brand that I found a lot that's, you know, fairly cheap. Oli is also a really great RAM provider for me in the budget sector. But the next two parts are the ones that are going to help you sell your PCs the best, and that's the case and the graphics card. So let's talk about the cases. Your PC cases can really help you sell a PC. When you're flipping PCs, you probably don't want a case like this. You can't see the inside of the parts. There is like a red fan at the front, but you know, you really can barely see it. I tried flipping a PC in this early on in my career and never got any hits. I changed the case and bam, I sold it in less than a week. So this is not the kind of, even though this is a cheap PC case, this cost me like $35 on Newegg or something stupid like that. But you're not going to sell the PC in this. It's just probably not going to happen unless it's just like super duper cheap. So I would avoid cases like this at all possible costs. So we're going to put it to the side. Another budget option is a case like this. You can see the inside of it, but the only problem is you can't really like hide the power supply at all. I don't know if you can see that in the light that we have here, but you can't really hide the power supply at all in a case like this. So all those cords are really hard to cable manage, and there's no RGB fans, so you'd have to buy RGB fans. And if you're going to do that, then you might as well buy something like the DIY PC Cube 01. Now, if you just search up DIY PC on Newegg, it's not going to pop up there because forever I could not find this case that everybody was talking about. But if you go to Newegg and you type in DIY PC, no spaces, Cube 01, again, no spaces in between Cube and 01. It'll pop it up. There's a white version and a black version. They're around $55. They are micro ATX cases. That means they'll go with those micro ATX motherboards. If you were paying attention when I talked about motherboards earlier in the video, so most of the time that is what I shoot for when I'm trying to flip PCs, because I can get the most out of, you know, my money, where the customer's happy and I'm, you know, make some money for myself. We just have to be really careful depending on the deals you get, you know.
So in the process of editing this video, I realized I forgot to tell you about the fans for the DIY PC case, and there's really only one fan that I recommend, and that's these Thermalright fans here. They come in packs of 3. They have 3-pin RGB headers which sync with most motherboards that I've used, even ASRock, and they look pretty good and they're affordable. The fans also come in a white version that's like $14, so whichever look you're going for, you got fans.
Now for some higher end type PC builds with micro ATX motherboards, there is this case right here that I really like. It's the Zalman P30. It comes with 3 fans. You would have to like flip these two fans that are over here on this side so that they will intake air. I mean, you don't have to, but I just do because airflow would be a little better. But it comes with these 3 fans. It fits a micro ATX board. It's a really nice case, but it is like $100. So I would only do this for builds that are going to be like in the $700, $800 range. I typically only use cases like this for like custom builds that I get messages for, hey, I want to spend, you know, $800, $900 for a PC. Then I might do, you know, a case something like this. The other type of case that also is really good, and it's only $80, and I just recently used it in the pink PC build that's on my channel. It's the Apevia Prism. They have a white version, a black version, and a pink version. They come with 5 RGB fans. It's a really solid case. 5 fans. You can sync them to the motherboard as well. They are proprietary fans, but you can sync them to the motherboard really easy. Instructions are in the box, but that's another great case to flip PCs for. And if you happen to come across a great deal on a regular ATX motherboard, there are 2 cases that I really like. One I just found out about. I bought 2 of them. They're sitting in my dining room right now. My wife's probably not too happy about that because I just don't have enough room in here, but she'll be okay. But it's the Sama Neview. I think that's how you say it. Neview. It's Neview. They have 3 RGB fans that kind of look like the Lee & Lee style fans, and you can buy extra fans of this brand if you want, but it looks really cool, and it's a full ATX board, and right now they've been going for like only like $70, and the only reason I don't recommend them the whole time because of the way they look, it looks pretty cool, but it's because it needs that ATX motherboard. If you put a micro ATX motherboard in there, it's just going to look weird with that empty space at the bottom. You don't want that. So if you do get a good ATX motherboard deal, which sometimes happens on Facebook Marketplace and eBay, that case is absolutely awesome. If there are any cases that I forgot that you think are pretty good cases to flip in, just let me know down in the comments. But there is one area of PC flipping that I really like to do that helps me sell PCs, I think, a lot and catches the eye of buyers, but it is going to cost you a little bit extra money. And that's PC cable extensions. Cable extensions add a little bit of flair to the build, especially, you know, the ones that go to the GPU. You can pick these up for about 20 bucks. They come in all different kinds of colors: orange, pink, red and black, white. You can get whatever color you want for the most part, except can't have an orange cord that goes to my 4090, but that's beside the point. Anyway, so what we would like to do sometimes is I'll buy a pack of these, $20, $30, and for the GPUs that only use 1 cord, I'll save the other ones for later. And sometimes if it's a cheap build, I'll just use one of these extra cords to put into a smaller GPU just to add 1 layer of pop to the build. It looks a little bit nicer than, you know, the normal black cables. These are totally optional though. I've sold PCs without them, but I just try to keep some on hand, especially if I'm selling a PC in like the $700 or $800 range. Now it'd be time to talk about the graphics card. However, we can't do that because we don't have anything to power our gaming systems, and you need a power supply in order to have a gaming PC. So let's talk about some of the best power supplies real fast, and then we'll talk about the graphics cards that'll get you the most money when selling PCs. So for the power supply, I typically go between 3 brands. The first one I don't have a box available for me, and that's this MSI Mag 550 watt power supply. 550 watts is pretty good enough for most builds. It just doesn't leave people with a whole lot of upgradability, but it's from a solid brand, so you know that's easily a great option for you to go to. A lot of times it is $50, but sometimes it's as high as like $60, and I just don't want to pay $60 for only 550 watts. But that's just me. So the other 2 brands that I have here are Apevia and Sigotep. Now, Apevia, the only one that I really recommend is this Apevia Prestige. It is 600 watts. It's on the PSU tier list, or cult list, as some people say, but it's on the PSU tier list as a C-rated power supply, which is great for budget builds. 600 watts. It's got the power connectors you need for, you know, a GPU that has 2 8-pin connectors, so it's perfectly fine as far as that goes. This is only like $50 to $55, so it's a really nice option for 600 bucks. Sigotep is my go-to for pretty much anything over 600 watts. They have a 750 watt power supply that's fully modular. That's only $80. That is great for those higher end budget builds like in the $700, $800 range. Love this power supply. 80 bucks, you really can't beat it. It's modular, so it's super easy to cable manage, but they also have a 650 watt version that's also gold certified, and it's pretty solid too. I've used it a pretty decent bit, and it's had no issues whatsoever. It is not modular though, so you have to deal with all the cables, but that's okay because you know it's a budget PC. As long as you cable manage it somewhat, you'll be okay. You just don't want the PC to go boom, so pick something reliable, has good reviews, use and you should be okay. I don't use anything like the Thermaltake Smart White version unless I'm going super duper cheap on a build, you know, that's $300 or something like that. And as I said earlier, I normally don't buy used power supplies unless it's for cheap builds, and I test it with a power supply tester. But now the part you've all been waiting for, and that's the graphics cards. Now, graphics cards can make or break your PC flip. If you try to use something like an RTX 3050, you're going to be paying a lot more money than it's really worth, and you're probably not going to make a whole lot of money back on it. The only reason I have this is because I upgraded my brother's PC for free for him, so I, you know, got this as payment basically, and I used it in several videos here on the channel, so I will use this in a flip eventually, but you know, I don't have a whole lot of money in it, so it's not going to really hurt me. But I don't recommend getting something like this because it can be like $200 on the used market, and it's just not worth it for a PC flip. So one of my favorite graphics cards is the 1660 Super from Nvidia. It is around $100 on the used market, but if you're patient and you look on eBay a lot or your Facebook Marketplace locally, you can find a really good deal on a 1660 Super. I pick them up for $75 or $80 a lot, so that's something you can keep in mind. The 1070, the 1070 Ti, 1080, all of those are good if you can find them in the $100 to $120 range. The only problem with the 1660 Super is it does only have 6 gigabytes of VRAM, so that makes it a little tougher. So the next card from Nvidia I also, you know, might recommend is the RTX 2060. Now, I don't have one of those on hand, but they're starting to come down to that $120, $150 range, and RTX, for whatever reason, has, you know, a very high meaning to people. It's all over YouTube right now, and it just, I think it might sell a little better, but it's got to be at the right price. And best price to performance, again, just like the CPUs that we talked about earlier, is going to be Team Red. And that's this graphics card right here, the 5700 XT. Now, this is like an OEM model, so I would, you know, probably get a different model than this, but I picked this one up on eBay several months ago for only $100. I haven't used it yet in a flip because I was making a lot of YouTube videos on it, and I got a couple more I'm going to make before I put it in a flip. But 5700 XT can be found anywhere from $150 to $170 right now. For a while, they come down to like $120, but they've shot back up in price, but they are a very solid card. And for just a few dollars cheaper, like in the $120 range, you can get just a regular 5700. Another option is also the RX 6600. They're all around the same price. Whatever fits in your budget that you're trying to make money for, those cards you really can't go wrong with. Cards that I would stay away from though are, you know, like it's really hard to make money on the higher end stuff, like the 3060s, the 3070s. That stuff's really hard to make money on unless you just get a crazy deal like some people on YouTube seem to get, and I never get them. But you know, you can find really awesome deals like that from time to time, and those cards are okay. I also don't like to use the RX 580. That is probably gonna not be a great thing for some people in the comment section, but I don't like to use the RX 580 because it's losing driver support, or it's already lost driver support. I can't keep up with all of that, and so it's gonna run into problems sooner rather than later. And especially in games like, you know, Fortnite, I don't really like the way it feels playing on the RX 580 in Fortnite. It's been a while since I tried it. Maybe I need to try it again, but I just didn't like it last time I tried it. So that's why I don't typically use the RX 580. For really cheap builds that are for Fortnite, I like to use the GTX 970 or the 1060 6GB version. Those you can find for $50 to like $70. They're going to pretty much give you almost the same exact performance as the RX 580, except maybe in AAA games it might be a little less, but you can just, you know, lower the resolutions and be fine playing those games and be just fine. Actually, I just did a video on the GTX 970, and it actually really shocked me in the performance that it actually gave you here in 2024. For only $47, that is a great budget build to keep your price really down, especially in builds that I sell around $500. I think that's a great GPU to get, but you can let me know what you think down in the comments. And if there's any parts that I looked over or I forgot, please flame me down in the comments, because, you know, I'm trying to make money too, so if I missed something, I want to know. And if you want to see me put all of this into action, I'm flipping PCs until I buy my wife a pool. So go check out that series.